or any kind of questions, just fire them up on the spot. You know, there's no problem at all, and we'll deal with them as they come up, or at the end if you want to hold on to something till the end, we can deal with it then either. Yeah. But yeah, keep it as loose and free as possible. I don't want to just be droning on either. You know, if I see us falling asleep there, and it will. So you can all see that, and you can see me, I hope.
Sure, switch.
So how do we switch that view, Andy, to me?
I can see you, Jody.
Okay, yeah, okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Happy days.
Whatever you do, sweetheart.
Oh no, sorry, one sec. I won't matter down there.
Oh, gorgeous.
Oh, yeah, there we go. Right, cool. Sorry. Well, Breathe Easy is the kind of title that I came up with because your breathing should be easy, and ultimately we want you to be able to breathe easy, and for so many reasons. Like I said in the blurb beforehand, you know, we can live 3 months without food, 3 weeks, or 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water, but 3 minutes without oxygen or without breathing. So we spend a lot of time on our food and on our hydration, and we think about that stuff a lot, but we never really think about breathing. That's because it's an automatic thing that just happens, you know. But hopefully we're going to reframe it a little bit for you, and also just give you tools that you can use to bring the breath and to control the breath and to use it for different things. And really what the art of breath, which is the style of breath work that I study, and it's all about removing dogma from the breath. And you know, they've looked at all of these different breath work patterns across the world, from Tumo and Tego, pranayama, and just kind of condensed what works from all of these different things into just non-dogmatic. There's no kind of ceremony or anything like that around it. So it just gives you the raw tools. Now, if you're into a certain style of breath work or yoga or something like that, you can always bring those practices into it. You know, there's nothing wrong with those practices. It's just that it's easier to get a view of what's going on and then just remove all of that. Just gonna mute you there, Andy, yeah? For a second. So yeah, why breathing? So in a lot of ancient cultures, the word for breath and the word for soul is actually the same word. And I think the reason for that is that they understood that this was a way of us interacting with the environment, and it must have seemed like magic to them, you know. But the minute the breath stopped, the life stopped, and life starts with a breath as well. But in terms of the benefits of focus on our breath, it really is the low-hanging fruit that we can quite easily snatch across the board, just to make big gains in lots of different areas, or just to become more efficient and improve many different things about our physiology and our mechanics. And we're going to talk about all of that stuff in simplistic terms. I'll not get too deep into it, but one thing that can change your whole breathing pattern and is a big problem nowadays is mouth breathing. So the majority of people are breathing through the mouth. And there's a lot of confusion around what's going on when we breathe. And people think that they are under breathers, you know, that they're not breathing deep enough, or that they're not taking in enough air. But actually, really the opposite is true, is that we're over breathing and we're exhaling too much, and we're not holding on to any carbon dioxide in our body. And this affects our nervous system, and affects our mechanics, and it affects our cognitive function in a lot of ways as well. So improving the breathing can just leach out into all these different areas. So nasal breathing versus mouth breathing, like, why would we want to breathe through our nose, and why is it so important on so many levels? So 90% of your time you should be breathing through your nose. Your mouth is primarily designed for digestion, so for putting food into, and you should really only use the mouth when you've pushed to a level that you can't breathe through the nose anymore. So 90% of your day should be spent breathing through your nose. And there's a couple of different reasons for this. It triggers your parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest and digest, kind of calming side of the nervous system. And breathing through the nose is a trigger for that. So it immediately starts to bring you more into a parasympathetic rest and digest state than a fight or flight high stress state. So just by breathing through your nose, you're going to alter that autonomic nervous system just a little bit towards calmer, towards more recovery, more rest. And we're going to talk about why you can recover better when your sympathetic system is less fired up. Nitric oxide is a gas that we release from our nostrils into the air that we're breathing. So it's like a rebreather. And nitric oxide, it's a vaso and a bronchial dilator. So it dilates your bronchial passageways. It dilates all your blood circulation, your veins and your arteries, and allows more blood to flow easier. And it allows your nasal passages to open up and your whole bronchial pathways. So that's one part of it, which is massive because you can take in more air and we can get more blood around our body, means we can do more work for less stress. It sterilizes the air that we take in, so it acts like a sterilization on bacteria and different viruses and things like that. And the last one is perfusion. So this is a really important one. When we breathe through the nose, you release that nitric oxide into the air that we're breathing, and it allows the blood to perfuse up a little bit higher in the lungs. So usually we use about 30% of our lungs, maybe 40%. When the nitric oxide is present, it allows about a 30% increase in blood perfusion. So we can use the upper part of the lungs more, and we can take in more oxygen from the blood that we're breathing, because the more blood that's in contact with the air, the more can be extracted from it. And the last one is the filter. So the hairs, the things we're always trying to get rid of out of our nose. You have the same amount of hair follicles in your nasal passageways as you do on your head. So there's tons and tons, and they just form a matrix in there, and they really filter the air as you breathe it in. They're also a trigger for the parasympathetic nervous system. When those hairs are stimulated, that's what gives our nervous system a trigger to relax a little bit. And it humidifies the air as we take it in, which allows us to process the air quicker rather than having to heat it up or cool it down to body temperature. And this is all happening like super fast, obviously, but they're the main benefits of nasal breathing. Does anyone there not have the ability to breathe through their nose at all, or do you find it really difficult to breathe through your nose?
I find if I'm lifting weights and I'm trying to brace my core, that it's much easier to brace my core when I breathe through my mouth. I kind of struggle a bit to brace through my nose when I'm breathing through my nose, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, it depends on the intensity of the activity as well, I suppose. And with bracing, actually, it's a mechanical function. So what you're doing is bracing against the air that you have in your lungs. So you breathe in, you're bracing against it. So that's very much mechanical control as well. And you can obviously develop that much better through the nostrils. But I would say that nasal breathing is much less important for high intensity activities than it is for kind of everyday and low intensity activities. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. But if anybody has like trouble breathing through the nose, so I when I started this stuff, I couldn't breathe through my nose really at all, and I thought it was because I had a broken nose a couple of times and a deviated septum, so I just figured I couldn't breathe through the nose. But as you release nitric oxide in, and as you practice nasal breathing, your passageways will open up and they will dilate more over time, so it will get much easier to breathe through your nose as you go on, especially if you're not used to doing it normally. So I just want to let you know that if you feel like you can't breathe through your nose, and with a little bit of practice, it opens up really quickly. So CO2 versus oxygen. This is the big misunderstanding. People want to breathe deeply because they think they need to get more oxygen in. But the reality of it is our blood is saturated with oxygen, like to nearly 90% or even 100% a lot of the time. The problem is not being able to get the oxygen out of the blood and into the tissues, such as the local muscles. Like if we're doing a workout, it's the local muscles that need that oxygen extracted. And if there's no CO2, so CO2 is a waste product, carbon dioxide, but it's been demonized a little bit. So we think we just need to get rid of CO2, but we actually need to retain some carbon dioxide within the tissues and within the blood to enable the oxygen to be scrubbed out of the blood into the tissues. So if you're over breathing and you're just breathing all of that CO2 out, there's none left in your body to actually help to remove the oxygen from the blood, if that makes sense. That's kind of the simplest I can put it. So we need CO2 in our system to be able to extract the oxygen from the blood to release the energy at the muscle. And if we're over breathing, we're just dumping that air. When you nasal breathe, it creates a little bit of a restriction and you end up holding on to some of that CO2 within your body. A nice example of this is, what do you do if somebody is having a hyperventilation situation? You know, what do you always see people do to stop someone hyperventilating?
Slow down their breathing or pace their breathing.
Yeah, so you see people with a brown paper bag.
Into a bag, yeah.
Yeah, and what that's doing is like creating a high CO2 environment. So as they're breathing into the bag, they're rebreathing the same carbon dioxide back in. And it's actually the carbon dioxide in their system that allows them to stop hyperventilating and release more oxygen into the tissues. So they've got into a cycle where they're over breathing, dumping all of their CO2, which means no oxygen can be present at the muscle, or very little, not optimal. And it gets into this just cycle of dumping CO2, but trying to get more oxygen into the body. And that's what the hyperventilation is. So by slowing the breathing down and creating a restriction, you're allowing more oxygen to be released at the tissues, and everything can just calm down then, if that makes sense. So when we breathe through the nose, we're kind of trying to have that same effect of retention of CO2, which allows us to be much more efficient in general with oxygen. So it's very important to practice nasal breathing. And for you guys, like if you're training, anything that should be aerobic, you should be really trying to breathe through your nose. And a good way to develop it though is just to focus on your warm-up, try to nasal breathe for your warm-up, and then when you go into the workout, you can breathe as normal. And over time, you'll get more and more used to it as you go. So there is a way that you can test your tolerance to CO2. So if someone's intolerant to CO2, they're going to be over breathing and exhaling that CO2 all the time. And what makes you want to breathe is a buildup of CO2 in your lungs. It's not actually a lack of oxygen. It's when the CO2 builds up in your lungs, and that's what gives you that feeling of wanting to breathe again. So the more tolerant you can become to it, the less you need to breathe to do the same amount of work, which is going to mean your heart rate is probably going to be lower as well. So the CO2 tolerance test, and we can all do this now. What you will need is just like a timer of some kind on your phone. And I'll talk through the test, I'll show you, and then we can all kind of hit it together and you'll get a score. And from that, we can look at how kind of tolerant you are to CO2 and what that tells us about your body. So tolerance gives us a little look into how emotionally reactive a person can be, because the less CO2 tolerant you are, the more likely you are to be in a stressed, kind of high anxiety, fight or flight, sympathetic nervous state. And the more tolerant you are, the more likely you're to be in a rest or digest state. How well they can tolerate all-cause stress. So basically how well your body can handle stress on the whole, whether it be physical, mental, or training load, or whatever it may be. How well you can handle workload. So how much work you can do. Think of it like gears in a car. You know, if two cars are racing and one car is in second gear and the other car is in third or fourth gear, the car in second gear is revving the engine super high to do the same amount of work that the car in third or fourth gear is kind of just cruising along. And that's the difference that your CO2 tolerance can have in your workload. And how well the breathing apparatus can control the breath. So it's a controlled exhale, so it can kind of give us an insight how controlled you are at actually having ownership over that breath. So it works like this, really simple. You're going to take 3 deep, normal, slow breaths. So that would be just like, not too deep, not too forced, just a nice deep breath, nice relaxed exhale for 3. On the final breath, you're going to take a full inhale, so fill your lungs up as much as you can. When you start the exhale, that's when you're going to start the timer. and do the longest, slowest exhale that you can manage. Try not to swallow or stop. Once you stop, that's when you stop the timer.
All through the nose, Jody.
All through the nose, yeah, if possible, unless you have like a restriction where you can't breathe through the nose. So yeah, start the timer at the top of the exhale, and then try to make it like barely perceptible, you know, so that's kind of how slow you want the breath to be. And the minute you feel the urge to breathe again, or you run out of air, stop the timer, and then we'll look at your scores from there. Happy enough?
Yes.
Okay, y'all want to give it a try? So it's going to be kind of, I'll guide you, but you're going to be working kind of in your own time, and you have your own timer to start. So start with your 3 nice deep breaths, in through the nose, out through the nose. Yeah, one more. Nice deep breath in. Exhale. And on the next inhale now, you're going to take a really deep inhale. So fill the lungs up as much as you can. Pack the air in. And the second you start to exhale, start your timer. And just make that exhale as slow and as soft as you can. Again, don't force anything here. As soon as you feel the need to rebreathe or you run out of air, just stop the timer. And maybe if you're done, you can just like throw your hand up and let me know that you have finished. Cool, all done?
Yep.
Happy days. Right, so let's take a look at what our scores might look like. So the one thing to bear in mind as well is that you want to try this a couple of times, and your first couple of scores will probably improve quite dramatically because you're getting mechanically used to it. So obviously this is just your very first. Don't take this as like the gospel. Give yourself a chance to kind of get used to the test a little bit as well. So sub 20 seconds, did you have anyone sub 20? No? Good, lovely. So sub 20 would be like, let's work on that like immediately, do you know what I mean? Because you're very intolerant of CO2, and the chances are that, you know, you're not operating as you should be in any
I was 19.97 seconds.
Yeah, so that's like, you know, like you're right there at 20. So definitely some of the stuff that we're talking about today is going to be good for you to improve that super quickly.
Yeah.
You know? And it will improve really quick. Like you can improve it actually in the space of a couple of minutes, but you want to be doing it all the time to kind of keep it working its way up through that tolerance level as we go, you know.
Okay.
So most people probably fell into the 20 to 40 second bracket, I'm assuming, which is usual. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone higher than the 20 or 40?
38.
That's 45.
50.
Nice. Lovely. They're good scores, you know. So most people we usually see fall into their 20 to 40 seconds. Kind of I hate putting labels on things like average, good, intermediate, but just as a gauge of where you're at in terms of CO2 tolerance. Now that doesn't mean that you are not a absolute beast at performing, or that, you know, it just means that this is an easy little thing that you can use to improve your recovery and to improve your cognitive function and to reach out into all these different areas. And it's a great way to gauge. So if you hit 40 to 60 seconds, that's, you know, that's above average. That's pretty good. You've got a good CO2 tolerance, and it's great. You're probably getting a very efficient breathing pattern going. But it's always in our interest to push this up. You know, there's no situation where it's not better to have good CO2 tolerance, really. So whatever score you got, you can always improve it, and you're going to improve all the other markers that go along with it. So that's a good test to perform, maybe, you know, once every 2 weeks or once every month or something like that, just to keep an eye on where you're at. And this is also correlates directly with our aerobic fitness and where our aerobic threshold sits. And we'll talk about that in a second. So there's lots of different metrics that are involved in this, you know. And the CO2 tolerance test also helps us to build CO2 tolerance. So it can be used as a test and as a practice. So let's talk about the 3 pillars of health. So there's 3 kind of main areas that, or 3 pillars of breath, I should say, sorry. So the 3 kind of main areas that are affected and can affect the breath. So it's a two-way street. The first one is our state. So that's our nervous state, the difference between stressed, fight or flight, and relaxed, rest and digest. And we don't want to be living in a high stress state, obviously, all the time. So the breath affects our state, but also our state can affect our breath. So it works both ways. And the mechanics of what's going on. So how is our actual breathing patterns, and how can we use breath to change our body mechanically? And again, it's a two-way street. And the last one is physiology. So that's how we get energy from the air that we breathe at the tissues and how we can improve that. And they're all kind of measured in some way by the CO2 tolerance test as well. So we go a bit deeper into state. So we talked about autonomic nervous system. This is our parasympathetic versus sympathetic, stress versus rest, basically. And people think that these are like black and white. So you're either stressed or you're in a rest and digest state. So it's one or the other. But in reality, it's like a sliding scale. So if you think of a fader, maybe on a music, the fader between 2 speakers, it's never like fully one or the other. It's always just a mix of the 2, but it leans towards one or the other. So it's not that you're sympathetic or you're parasympathetic. It's more that you're leaning one way or leaning the other way. And if you guys did Nathan's seminar last week, you talked about HRV, and that's a great measure of the same thing, of sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous action. So our breath is affected by the nervous system. So if, for instance, if we get a fright and we go into a fight or flight state, you know, immediately our mouth opens and we start to pant through our mouth because we're preparing for anaerobic action, we're preparing for a stress state. And if we're nice and relaxed when we're lying in bed, our breath is slow and easy. So our nervous state affects our breath, but it's like you can reverse engineer it by using the breath to feed back into the nervous system as well. You know, like we've known about this for thousands of years, but that's really what is going on. So by replicating basically a relaxed breath, that feeds back into our nervous system and we slip more towards a rest and digest state. If we're panting and breathing through our mouth, we're going to push ourselves more towards sympathetic or stressed state. And it's not that parasympathetic is bad and sympathetic is good. Sometimes we need sympathetic action if we're lifting heavy weights, for example, or if we're going to do some sprints. We need that sympathetic system to be working. And if we want to go to bed, we want to obviously be in a parasympathetic state. But the real trick is being able to go from one to the other smoothly. We call that autonomic tone. So that's how quickly you can go from a stress state to a relaxed state and kind of back again. And the breath is a great way to give yourself control over that and let your nervous system get used to slipping between the 2. Because you look at animals, say you look at like a gazelle or something, you know, it's getting hunted by a tiger and they're sprinting full out panic stations 1 second, and then 2 seconds later they're just eating grass like nothing happened. That's like animals have that ability to just slip in and out of stress and rest and digest really easily. Now that's something that we naturally have. It's something that our breath can help us to regain. So this is called the step-up protocol. And this is a really nice breath pattern for if you want to be energized and you want to be focused at the same time. Right? So it's a really balancing breath. If you're stressed, it's going to relax you. If you're really feeling sluggish, it's going to give you a little bump up, and you're going to just find that nice center ground where you're alert but relaxed. So it's really nice, like first thing in the morning, before training sessions. If you're going out to do a seminar, for instance, I did it before this, and it's really nice just to bring you into a balanced, like relaxed, focused state. So this is a really useful breath, and probably one that we can use for a big variety of situations. So we're going to go through it now. I'm going to explain it first, and then we're going to run through it on the time. And it takes about 5 minutes to run through this protocol, but it will be interesting to see how we feel afterwards. So the numbers here are seconds. So for the first step, we're going to be 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out for 5 breaths. Then we're going to do 1 second in, 1 second out for 20 breaths. So that's going to look like a little bit more of a forceful breath, and trying to pull it down to the stomach, but don't worry too much about where the breath is going. And at the end of those 20 breaths, we're going to exhale completely, and we're going to hold for 20 with exhale gains. And then we're going to take a little break, and I'm going to count this into the second round, which is a step up. So 5 seconds in, 5 out for 5 breaths, then 1 in, 1 out for 25 breaths. And again, 20-second exhale breath hold. And we might just do 2 rounds of it and see how we feel, and not do the whole protocol, because you'll definitely get a stimulus from that. Does that sound simple enough?
Yep.
Jody, it's in and out through the nose, is it?
Yeah, this is all through the nose. Yeah, absolutely. Unless you have a restriction that like stops you breathing through the nose, and it's best if we can, because it works on mechanics. Like our diaphragm works much better when we breathe through the nose. So yeah, it's good for that reason. Now I'm gonna do something a little bit freaky here, right? So can you still see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm using a metronome here, and it's just an easy way to count your breaths, because if you're using a timer to count, especially with a group, if you lose count, it's hard to jump back in. So you know what a metronome is? It's just, can you hear that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So that's just an online metronome. It's set at 60 beats a minute. So that means each beat is a second. And that's how we're going to count our breaths. If you fall off like the count, you can always just jump back in on the next beat and get going again. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yep.
Right. Let's give it a try. I am going to actually just pause you guys, or mute you guys for a second.
Okay.
While we do this, there's that mute button. If I can find the mute button. Doesn't matter. We'll get it going. Okay. So we're going to start with our 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out, and I'm going to count you in to the 3, 2, 1, and then we'll go in from there.
Okay.
Okay. So with your posture, just try to be as upright with your spine as you can. It's not super important, but a little bit of freedom in the rib cage is nice. Okay, so we're going to start with our first inhale in 3, 2, 1, and in 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, in 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, in 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, in 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4. One more here. 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4. And we're going to go to bellows breath now. 1 in, 1 out. And just keep at that pace and go about 20 breaths here. So just keep that. One big inhale, one big exhale. And just hold at the bottom. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 13, 14, 15, 16, return to normal breathing now. Let it come in and out, nice and easy. Next round, we're going to 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. Then do our same 20 breaths in and out through the nose, nice and fast, and exhale and hold for 25 seconds. And we're going to go in 3, 2, 1, and in 2, 3, 4, 5, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, in 2, 3, 4, 5, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, in 2, 3, 4, 5, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, in 2, 3, 4, 5, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, in 2, 3, 4, 5, out, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, 25 breaths in and out, nice and fast. Your next exhale, just exhale fully and hold with empty lungs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 18, 19, 20, 1, 2, 3, 4, and relax. Something really hypnotic about that metronome. How are you feeling?
Relaxed.
Yeah, definitely relaxed.
Yeah. So the step up is lovely for just like centering. If you're not sure where you are, you know those days when you don't know whether you're anxious or whether you're like don't have energy, you know, and you're kind of in between. And step up will always just bring you back to a nice balanced place. And with another round, it's even more. As you get a little bit more advanced, you can extend those breathing patterns out. So you can start at like 6 seconds and build it up to 7 and 8 on the inhale and exhale as you get a little bit more developed. But starting at 4 is perfect. That's a really nice tool. Anyone, any input on it or anything come up?
Is it the same? It's the same logic as the Wim Hof method.
So the Wim Hof method will be basically just the middle bit with the exhale hold, and that's a maximum effort hold. So I'm not shitting on Wim Hof is great, but it's kind of one side of the argument, and it's a sympathetic breath, so it brings us into a stress state. Think of Wim Hof like training. So you do it, it stresses you out a little bit, and then your body recovers from it. But I would say if you're more on the anxious side of things, or if you lean towards that kind of high sympathetic state, Wim Hof maybe is not the best thing for you to be practicing straight away until you're a little bit more developed. It's all about relaxing the nervous system as much as you can, you know? So yeah, there's elements in there. So the first part of it, the even inhale, even exhale, is like a parasympathetic trigger, and that's rest and digest. The second part with the fast breath is a sympathetic trigger, so that is a little bit of a energizing breath. And the breath hold on the exhale is always a sympathetic trigger, so it's an energizing thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a mishmash, but it kind of, that's where it brings us to a lovely middle point. Let me just reshare this now. Yeah, so step-up protocol is super handy to have in your toolbox. And let's talk a little bit about mechanics. So what's going on when we're breathing and kind of where we should be breathing, because the way that we move and the environment and habitat that we have created for ourselves has shut our patterns down to a certain extent. So a lot of the time we see rib cages that can't move and thoracic spines that can't move. And this all affects your breath really negatively. So belly breathing, we hear a lot of people say, you know, breathe into your belly, and belly breathing is brilliant, but it can be just a way that we bypass our rib cage, you know, and that if our rib cage doesn't move, breathing into your belly is just a way to avoid having to actually expand your rib cage. So yes, belly breathing is great, but it has to come along with a nice spinal wave or a nice breath wave where the rib cage actually lifts and moves. So belly breathing is not the golden ticket that it's made out to be. And it is something that's great, but it has to be in conjunction with a rib cage that moves. So we can test our ability to move through the rib cage really easily. And the breath wave exercise is how we're going to do that. So I'll show you here. What you want to do is with your pinky fingers, find your lowest floating rib. So the rib that you can just pop your finger in underneath it. And you're going to spread your fingers and walk them up your rib cage just a little bit. You know, first I want you to just take a normal deep breath and just be aware of what's happening in your fingertips. Take a couple of breaths there without anything. And just feel the way your fingertips are moving. So what we would like to be happening is for the fingers to be moving in a wave. So as the rib cage expands outwards and moves away from the spine, we'd like to see those fingers lifting in a wave from bottom to top, and then the opposite way on the way down. So that's the way that the breath wave should work within the rib cage. So if we consciously take a couple of breaths now and try to bring that into our fingertips, so try to feel those floating ribs move first and walk the rib cage up as we open up into the chest. And as we exhale, feel the opposite. Try to feel those index fingers coming first and rib cage coming last. And do a couple of breaths of that. And just consciously think if this feels any different than the first couple of breaths that you took. And this is a really nice exercise. If you are not feeling that breath wave, then this is really a nice way to work on it and get that rib cage expanding and contracting. Is anyone having trouble with that? Does it feel weird or make sense?
Yep.
From physiological physiological boundaries in certain parts, but other than that's good.
Yeah, just go as high as you need to go. Well, you must have really big hands, Kate. Cool. So that's the breath wave. Does that make sense? That like if our rib cage is completely immobile, that breathing into the belly is just a way to kind of bypass the rib cage, and what we're really doing is like sucking our organs down to make room for our diaphragm to expand. Whereas we need that to happen, but we also need this like expansion through the rib cage. So working on that breath wave and bringing that awareness, breathing into your rib cage is perfectly fine. Something that's kind of, you know, been demonized a little bit as well. We're going to talk about a calming breath. So this is also something that we're going to use for a PNF stretching pattern. Does everybody know what PNF is?
No.
Oh, okay, so PNF is it's a mouthful. Post proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. I think that's right. Someone will call me out on it. But basically, it's when we get into a stretch and we contract and relax the muscle that we're actually stretching in order to allow us to move into the range a little bit more. So it works on our nervous system. When we contract the muscle, it kind of teaches our nervous system that there's safety there, that we have control in that range, and then it will allow us to go into the range a little bit more. So that's like basic PNF stretching, also known as contract relax. With this, we're gonna bring the breath into it a little bit to just maximize that like down regulation of the nervous system, so that the muscle is allowed, or the joint is allowed, to move into range a little bit more. And it's really simple. It's a 4-second inhale, a 4-second hold, and then an 8-second exhale. So anytime that the exhale is double the length of the inhale, we're triggering that down regulation of the nervous system. Probably the easiest way for us to feel this, like you've probably all felt this before in some regard, but adding the breath in gives it an extra little bit of parasympathetic dominance, which definitely allows you to relax a little more into it. But without stretching, this in itself, this breath of 4 in, 4 hold, and 8 out is a very relaxing, down-regulating breath. So we might just do a couple of rounds of it just to get us used to. I'm going to crack out my weird metronome again here. We're just going to do probably 6 little rounds of this just to give you a feel for it. 4 seconds in, 4-second hold with full lungs, which is a parasympathetic trigger, and then an 8-second exhale on the way out. And I'm going to count you in again, all right? Okay, so we're going to start with our first inhale. In 3, 2, 1, and in. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Out. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Out. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Out. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Out. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and relax.
Nice.
Now, hang on, stop that creepy metronome. Cool. How did that feel?
Great.
See. Okay.
Can you notice the difference between the 2 breath patterns that we did already? Do you notice a difference?
Yeah, I felt more relaxed the second time.
Yeah.
On the exhales, I found it easier to exhale to 8. Just got into a nicer rhythm with it.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is definitely more of a calming breath. So a good time to use this would be, if you're stressed out, or if you're getting ready for bed, or you just want to down regulate and chill out a little bit. This really just pushes you into that rest and digest state a little bit more. And the big part of that is the inhale hold and the elongated exhale. So even without the times involved in these, you don't necessarily need the times. All you have to think about is an inhale hold and a exhale, double the length of the inhale, is a calming parasympathetic trigger. And it really, the times themselves aren't necessarily that important if you were to do this just on your own on the park bench or something. You don't need to have your stopwatch out. You can kind of start to free ball these as you get more used to them, but the principles are what's important. So let's look at how we can use that breath in terms of getting into the mechanics of the body, or the mechanics of the breath. So I don't know if you can see this little ball here. So this is, you won't be able to do this now, but I'm just going to show you. This is called the courageous ball, and it's it's a yoga tune-up thing, and it's just a mobility ball, like a Pilates ball or something. But you can use just the kids' playground ball or something like that, like just a soft kind of very light inflatable ball. We're going to use this just to access the diaphragm, and this is really nice for just opening up the whole diaphragm area and letting those ribs move nicely. So yeah, this is a game changer in terms of breath. So that's why I'm showing you, even though you don't have the ball, but it's something that you can try if you can get something similar. So it's really simple. You're going to put the ball just between your rib cage and your hip bone. You're going to lie on top. You can also see there, yeah? And you're going to bring the same side leg up here. So that's important just to get the rest of your abdominal muscles relaxed. And from here, you're going to roll down until you just find the ball slips just real gently up under your rib cage. And the minute you hit the diaphragm, you'll feel it straight away. It's kind of like that psoas release. It's really, really intense. And from here, you're going to put your weight on the ball, keep the ribs lifted. Inhale for 4. On the hold, you're going to squeeze the muscle that you're stretching. So in this case, I'm going to squeeze my abs and my diaphragm down. And then I'm going to exhale and just relax completely for 8 seconds. And then we'll do the same again. Inhale, 4 seconds, squeeze for 4. Exhale for 8. The exact same breath pattern, and you're just squeezing the muscle that you are actually stretching. And with the diaphragm, you'll feel this open up really, really quickly. And straight away, you can feel like the expansion is much more full through the rib cage. So that's a really nice one, and it's really easy to do. Some other like big problem areas that we see with the breath are the hip flexors and the thoracic spine. I'm going to talk mostly about the hip flexors, and then I'm going to tell you how you can go about the thoracic spine. The thing is, all of these are things that you've done already, you know, in just your classes. Definitely in the movements, you've done all of these things already, but just in regards to breath and how we can increase the effectiveness of the stretch and open up the range. So, you know, your standard hip flexor stretch here, where you would be leaning in or reaching high, and using this pattern, we're just going to lean into it, find the stretch, inhale for 4. You're going to squeeze, so think about tucking your pelvis, fire that hip flexor in the psoas up. Exhale for 8. Through the nose and relax into it. And go again. Inhale, squeeze for 4, hold the breath, find the pelvis, and then relax into it. So it's very much the same as stretches that you've been using before, probably, but just in regards to the breath, these are kind of the real important ones. And the other one is the thoracic spine. So, you know the peanut ball? The 2 balls taped together into the upper back. Use that same pattern just to open up the thoracic spine. If you hit those 3, you'll feel like a huge expansion through your rib cage and a looseness through your rib cage. And it's really nice. So I highly recommend that. If you feel like there's physical restrictions within the rib cage, these are all directly related to that, you know.
So the peanut ball, is that like 2 tennis balls and you tape together, is it?
Yeah, exactly. Or one of, you know, like the mobility wad Gemini or something. It's like it's just a fancy one. It's the same thing.
Okay.
So with that, yeah. Say again?
Horizontal or vertically?
Oh, no, yeah, the 2 balls lying on it. I had one, but I smashed it.
Too much
It broke. They were cheap tennis balls. But yeah, basically, you just put it like into your upper thoracic.
Okay.
Then you're going to lie on the ground.
Okay.
So the ball is under your upper thoracic. Pull yourself, lift the hips, and from here, inhale for 4, and then you're going to just contract the muscles of the back for 4, and then exhale and just let yourself kind of sink into it. And what it does is it slips in between the ribs, and it just makes the ribs kind of open, you know, a little bit, and flex a little bit more and give you some range through that upper, because there's so much going on in the upper back with your rib cage, all the musculature overlaying that, and then the scapula on top, and more musculature again. It just becomes like super sticky if you're not moving it. You know, as you all know, if any of you have had trouble with overhead movements, it's the same thing. Does that all make sense?
Yep.
So yeah, I didn't want to get too crazy into doing PNF stretching or anything like that, but they're the kind of the big 3. that you want to look at in terms of loosening up your ribcage or breath? And now physiology. So this is like in a training context. This is where we start to see the breath really coming into its own. So we talked about nasal breathing earlier, and basically this is a massive oversimplification, but basically at its core, when we're nasal breathing, we are more aerobic than when we breathe through our mouth, even if we are doing the exact same amount of work. So if you're walking and you're breathing through your nose, you're much more aerobic, which means you're using fat as a fuel, and there's much less waste product of aerobic work than there is of anaerobic work. And you look at the names, even aerobic means literally with air, anaerobic means without air. And what happens when you're breathing anaerobically, when you're breathing through your mouth, you're dumping off the CO2, so you can actually get less oxygen to the tissue. So your body goes into glycolysis, it goes into carbohydrate burning within the muscles. And remember, it's a sliding scale. You're not just like suddenly anaerobic, you're just tipping the scales more towards anaerobic, you know. So especially true when we're running or when we're working a little bit harder. The longer we can stay aerobic, the more work we can do for less energy output, and like we're much more efficient, and there's less waste product coming off it for our body to deal with. So staying aerobic and having a high aerobic threshold it just makes you more efficient overall in terms of work capacity when you're doing anything. Again, this is massively overcomplicated, but anytime you are working and you're breathing through your nose, you are swinging the scales wildly towards aerobic. If you're doing the same thing and you open your mouth and start panting, you're going to tip that scales up towards anaerobic work. It tends to be heavier on our body, harder to recover from, more waste product to deal with, and on and on and on the list goes. So if you think about your aerobic threshold, you all know the term aerobic threshold?
No.
No? Okay, cool. Yeah, no problem. No, it's fine. Absolutely great. So the aerobic threshold basically is the point at which your body switches over from burning fat as a fuel into burning sugars as a fuel. So they're two kind of completely different energy systems. And the threshold is kind of where, you know, you'll be climbing up, pushing more and more towards anaerobic. And the threshold is the point where you switch over into carbohydrate burning rather than fat burning. So fat should be our primary fuel. If we're aerobic, as we should be most of the day, and we're breathing through our nose, we're going to be using body fat as a fuel. It's a really clean fuel to burn. So the idea is that if we can stay aerobic for as long as possible. So say for instance, I'm running up a hill. All right. So the longer I can stay aerobic, because the sugars, the carbohydrate burns out really quick. Think of it like rocket fuel. So the quicker we go anaerobic and we start to burn sugars, the sooner we run out of fuel. The longer we can stay using our aerobic system and still push harder and harder and harder, the more rocket fuel we're going to have in the tank for when we need it. So if you think of your aerobic system like your everyday bank account that you spend money from, and then your anaerobic system is like your savings account that you just tip into when you need to, but you want to keep it there for when it's needed. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So from a training point of view, it's always in our interest to stay aerobic as long as we can and to push that aerobic threshold higher and higher and higher. So how you would bring this into your training would be to try to maintain nasal breathing as much as you can. Definitely with your warm-ups and stuff like that, just moving and nasal breathing will improve your CO2 tolerance over time, and it will improve your aerobic threshold. But then once you get comfortable with it, because it can be a little uncomfortable at the start, and once you get comfortable with it, you can start to push that threshold a little bit and start to work while nasal breathing, you know, start to work a little bit harder. So anything that's like a semi-longish workout that's not super high intensity, you want to try and stay nasal breathing as long as you can, and stay aerobic as long as you can. And it's going to take much less of a toll on your body.
It feels much tougher to do it through the nasal, doesn't it? I mean, Andy did some of this with us in the gym.
It does. There's definitely an adaptation period, but it does happen pretty quick. But a lot of that is to do with if you're CO2 intolerant, you get this like panicked feeling, because I remember when I was starting this myself, it's like nearly a panic feeling, like you're suffocating, you know. And that's just until your body adapts a little bit to having that CO2 present. And when that happens, you can get much more oxygen out of the tissue. So the trick with practicing nasal breathing and for training is to let your nose guide your toes. All right, so only push to the point where you can comfortably breathe through your nose. And the idea is that, say we're talking about a 5K, for instance, just for simplicity, because it's a single modality thing. So if we're talking about doing a 5K, if I do my first 5K nasal breathing and it's like 20 minutes slower than my previous like mouth breathing 5K, that's fine. If I keep doing that over time, I'm going to be able to maintain that nasal breathing, and my speed will increase as I get more and more CO2 tolerant and more aerobically efficient. So in time, you will come back up to meet the 5K time that you had before, but it's just a matter of, you know, sticking it out and building up that tolerance until that happens. And, you know, that could be a hit in the ego, because it used to hit me hard. I'd be like, oh, the 5K is like 15 minutes longer than it used to be, or whatever. You kind of just park all of that and just focus on being able to go at the pace where you can breathe nasally, and that will improve over time. And when it does, you'll be able to do more work much more efficiently, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question, just because I struggle with the aerobic anaerobic concept.
Yeah.
But I liked your bank account. So, which is my savings, the sugar or the fat?
Well, in terms of, like the fat is stored on your body for longer term, so I see why that's confusing actually. But basically, the sugars are your backup, like that's your rocket fuel. You know, if you think of a car that has nitrous oxide in it, you know, because I know Kate's into badass shit like that. So your normal petrol fuel is your fat. You're using that most of the time driving around, even when you're going pretty fast. But then when you want to really hit a booster, you take out the red button and you hit it. That's your sugars. That's your carbohydrate. That's your glycolytic system. Yeah.
Cool.
So if you're not, like, if your threshold is lower, it means that you're going anaerobic. You're using those sugars like way earlier than you needed to, and then you're running on. It's like trying to use rocket fuel as a normal day fuel, you know. And you have to keep topping those things up. It's much dirtier. There's a lot more waste that your body has to get rid of, and so the difference. Is someone saying something there? Somebody put it a good way. It was like, oh, damn it, I'm after drawing a blank now. I'll come back to that. I'm after drawing a blank now.
Is it then, would it then, so this is where my further thinking is gone, is it fair to say then, if you are using the anaerobic system, for example, in a run, and you're running on jet fuel, that your recovery is going to take longer then as well?
Absolutely, because you're always, all these things interplay, and that's a great point, because the more stressed you are in general, and like glycolytic activity, anaerobic work is stressful by nature because your body has to recover from it. So yeah, the more of those factors that are pushing you towards that sympathetic stressed state, the harder it's going to be to recover, the longer it's going to take, and you know, all of that stuff is affected, and there's that interplay between them all, if that answers your question.
100%.
Yeah.
Jodie, is it the same if you're doing strength training? Like if you were doing weights or deadlifts and...
Yeah, so if you think about what we're doing, if we're doing heavy weights or if we're doing sprints, or that's all really actually highly anaerobic. So you can do a full 1 rep max squat probably without breathing at all. Yeah, maybe at the top you just let out, but that tells us that it's a purely anaerobic activity. But where the breath comes into it with that is in the recovery part of it. So recovering between sets, say of Olympic lifting, or if we can bring back in the nasal breathing and kind of calm the system down a little bit again, we'll be able to recover quicker in that short period of time than we would if we were just panting. So the quicker you can bring everything under control and trigger parasympathetic action, the quicker you're going to recover between sets as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thanks.
And one thing that works well, and we're going to talk about this now in our pre-training breath, and this could also be done kind of between sets, is a sympathetic trigger. So basically what's happening here is, and this has been proven actually to improve sprint repeatability with Olympic sprinters. So when they use this breath pattern, they're able to do repeat sprints and keep their times faster and do more volume overall. And all that this breath is doing, it's a 4-second in, a 4-second out. And this time the hold is on the exhale, which is a sympathetic trigger. So that is going to energize the nervous system and make us more CO2 tolerant, which is an important part. So it means that we can take on more CO2, which is a waste product of work, and which means we're going to be able to recover more quickly without having to dump all that CO2 and re-energize again. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you could do this before training for 2 to 3 minutes, or you could do it between sets. And after you feel recovered, before you go into the next set, that's the time to use this breath, because it's going to just ramp your system up just a little bit to get that energy production going again. And for anaerobic activity, it's perfect. All right.
Jody, how breathing through your nose and then out your mouth, is that a good compromise as regards trying to get the breath out a bit quicker?
Well, actually, it's not about getting the breath out quick. Like we want that little retainment of the breath, and that makes your diaphragm work a little bit more. So don't worry that you're not able to get the breath out the nose quick enough, because actually that's the whole purpose of breathing through the nose, is to create a little restriction and to maintain some of that CO2 in the body. Remember that what I said earlier about your blood being saturated with oxygen, like 90%, that's the level it's at most of the time. What changes is our ability to extract the oxygen from the blood at the local tissues, and retaining the carbon dioxide is what allows us to do that. If that makes sense, without getting too, yeah? So the restriction is kind of actually helping us out. And you don't need to empty your lungs completely every time, 4-second exhale, hold on the exhale. Doesn't mean you have to be completely emptied out, because 4 seconds is not actually that long of a time.
So it should be out the nose as well.
Yes, a short answer to your question. Yes, ideally. And if you are breathing out your mouth, what you would do is purse the lips a little bit so that you can create a little restriction rather than just dumping all of the CO2 out. So we do want that. Yeah. Okay, let's run through this a little bit and see how just to give you a handle on it. I'm going to start my weird little timer again. So if you want to just get into your position again, whatever you're comfortable with. We're going to start with our first inhale. 3, 2, 1, and in. 2, 3, 4, out. 2, 3, 4, hold. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In, 2, 3, 4. Out, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In, 2, 3, 4. Out, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And relax. Bring your breath back to normal. Stop the wheel timer. Cool. How would that feel?
Yeah, good.
Yeah, so you're not gonna get like a super buzzy feeling off that immediately, you know. But what that's gonna do is allow your tissues to be more tolerant of the CO2 and allow you to recover quicker. Because if you think about our anaerobic system again, so the glycolytic, the high intensity system is burning sugars, and in between sets, that sugar has to be replenished in order for the muscles to do more work. And our aerobic system is the backup that's providing that recovery, you know. So the more tolerant we are to CO2, the quicker we're going to be able to recover between sets of like heavy lifting or sprints or whatever your high intensity activity is. So this is a really nice one, like as you say, before weightlifting or between sets.
Be a good one to use for the boxing, I think.
It would be perfect. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, because that's a mix as well, you know. And you've got quite a lot of high intensity explosive stuff going on, and then cardiovascular base underneath it, which is just aerobic, you know. And then you've got to burst into heavy sets of explosiveness. So yeah, perfect. Good call. So then we're gonna get it. This is like just a little bit more advanced stuff that you might want to play around with or have some fun with, and it's a little bit weird, but it's all good stuff. It's not the kind of stuff you'd be doing in flight with, put it that way. So we call this hypoxic training your system to deal with CO2. Okay, and you can push this a little bit further by using external loads. And by using a bit more intensity. And essentially what you're doing here is holding your breath and doing work at its most simple. So if we look at like a simple thing you can do while you're walking down the street, so you can use this for just improving your CO2 tolerance on the whole. As you're walking down the street, you're going to take 4 normal breaths. So like we did with the ins and outs, just not forcing anything, just 4 normal breaths. On your last exhale, exhale fully, hold the breath, and just see how many steps you can continue walking for before you have to breathe again. And repeat that like 4 or 5 times. And each time just trying to stretch out the amount of steps that you're able to take without walking faster. And yeah, it's just a good little practice that you can do on the move to improve your CO2 tolerance, and it's really effective. So that would be like, say, step 1 of movement practice. And the other thing you can do is the same thing, but with like a loaded farmer's carry. And you could also do it with like, I wouldn't suggest doing it maybe with a squat bar until you're very comfortable with it, because the danger is that you lose your faculties. But with a farmer's carry, something that's decently heavy, you know, that you can carry across the room, but just about, say, the length of the studio, something like that. You're going to take, again, 4 normal breaths in and out. Exhale, hold your breath, pick up your farmer's carry or push your sled as far as you can until you need to breathe again. And the minute you need to start breathing again, you stop, measure your distance, and you can use that then as a metric to kind of see where you're at in terms of the CO2 tolerance or hypoxic load. And this really is pure anaerobic stuff. So if you're into explosive stuff like heavy weightlifting or Olympic weightlifting, stuff like this is gold dust, because it allows you to do work without even having to rely on the cardiovascular system at that time. So it's purely anaerobic work, but it really trains your body to become tolerant to the CO2. That's one you can play around with. That's fun. And the last one here is breath held sprints. So very similar thing. You're taking your 4 normal breaths. You're going to exhale completely. You can do it running, but I don't recommend it. Best done on something stationary so that you don't take a nosedive. But on your bike here, or on your last exhale, exhale fully, hold your breath, sprint as hard as you can, for as long as you can. As soon as you need to breathe again, you breathe. Mark your distance on the rower or your revolutions on the bike, or whatever metric you want to use. You mightn't even want to use a metric, that's fine. And that's a great way again to improve that, like glycolytic and anaerobic recovery, if that makes sense. So they're just 3 or 4 things you can play around with if you wanted to take it a little bit further. So any questions? I might actually do just take any questions that you have now, if you have any, and then we'll finish with the down regulating breath, because it's probably nice to finish with the breath anyway. So if anyone wants anything covered over again, or if you have any questions, hit me.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Just the piece you went over, the hypoxic training.
Mm-hmm.
Can you remind me of the benefit, like why I'm doing it?
Yeah, so the hypoxic training is removing the oxygen. So it's because you're doing an exhale to breath hold, it's removing that constant feed of oxygen. So it's making your body more efficient at using the oxygen that's in your blood. Yeah, but it's also training your body to deal with CO2. And it's also training your recovery for anaerobic work. So it's making you work in a purely anaerobic fashion, high intensity only, no oxygen, and then training your body to recover from that is the result of that stimulus. That's the adaptation. Does that make sense?
It does. A bird just sat on me.
Good luck.
Yeah. What should I expect to see as a result? Like, should I, like, in terms of, let's say, like running, could I jog further with, like I hear you say recover, but like
in terms of what you hopefully will see is your aerobic threshold going up, which means that you can do more work, harder work for longer periods, and maintain the same work output. So it means you're much more efficient. And if you were to think of it in terms of like breath versus heart rate, right? So say you're 150 beats a minute, right, is where you break into your anaerobic threshold or whatever. Well, if you're working with aerobic breathing, it means that you'll be able to do that same amount of work as you usually would be hitting 150 beats, but you'll be at 130 beats because you're more aerobic. Your threshold is higher, and you're not breaking into that anaerobic work as soon.
nice, because I gas out so early, like on so many things. Like I feel like I'm a stronger person, but I gas out before I'm able to reach what I think is my max. So I suspect this would help.
Yeah, a lot of the time, like gassing out is just an intolerance to the CO2, to the waste product that you're producing. And if you can tolerate the CO2 a little better, it means you can do more work and keep that same low level of breathing and output. So with aerobic work, it will make you more efficient overall, and it will make you be able to go further and eventually be able to go faster, but it takes a little bit of time to build it up. And also, if you're nasal breathing, like it's a form of exercise that's not really highly stressful on your body. So you can do quite a lot of like nasal breathing, running, and it's very low impact on your body while still being really good at developing your cardiovascular system and aerobic threshold, So there's good bang for buck there. And that will, then the higher your aerobic threshold is, like that will leach out into everything else, because it means you're keeping reserves of your rocket fuel for when you need it, Any more questions?
So do you know when you had the purple ball
Yeah.
and you put it in on so you put it under your rib cage, is it?
Yeah.
And then, okay.
So basically between, like, just under your bottom rib
Yeah.
and over your hip bone.
Over your hip bone, okay.
And
Perfect.
then when you lie on it, you're going to lift that same side leg just to get the other abdominal muscles out of the way.
Okay.
And then you want it coming up and under your rib cage, just a little bit. It does it naturally, like, because the ball is soft.
Yeah.
You'll feel that diaphragm stretching out straight away. You'll know when you hit it, like it's it's
has to be obviously a softball.
And yeah, like softer, it's going to be more forgiving, obviously.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But you can do it. I've done it with harder balls, you know. So yeah, it's not. It's just a question of how intense it's going to feel for you.
Okay.
You know, and what your pain sensitivity is like, I suppose. But you know, when you're only accessing something for the first time,
go easy.
With a tool, yeah, obviously, like if it's the first time you've ever like hit your diaphragm with a mobility tool, it's probably going to be like, yo.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
No problem. Anything else? Happy days. Right, cool. We will finish with this really nice down regulating breath, and it's so beautifully simple that I hardly even need to explain it. We're not even going to use a timer on this one. With the inhale, just inhale to a comfortable full lungs, all right? You're not over forcing the air in, just to a comfortable feel. And on the way out, you're going to just do the longest, softest exhale that you can do. And again, it must be comfortable, so don't stretch it out to the point where it's uncomfortable. At the end of that nice long exhale, you're going to start again with your inhale. And it's about a 2-minute practice, which will be only a couple of breaths really if you're really focusing on that exhale. Yeah, exhale through your nose, make it as slow and as soft as you can, all right? And then this breath is just a huge trigger for parasympathetic rest and digest state. It's perfect before bedtime if you're super stressed, or you're going to go in and have a nice bubble bath with some candles. This is a nice one to do, you know? But I wouldn't use it like in the middle of the day, or because it's really going to down regulate you, which may leave you feeling a little bit zonked, you know. Cool. So I'll just bring you in, and then we're just going to sit with it. I'm going to let you work away in your own time for about 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes, and then we'll come back here and we'll finish up and we'll go on from there. All right. Cool. So if everyone just gets into a nice comfortable position, spine straight is desirable, and we're going to start with our first inhale. 3, 2, 1. Just take a nice relaxed full inhale. On your exhale, make it as slow and as soft as you can. And you don't want to push this to the point of discomfort. Just nice slow exhale. At one point you will either run out of air or you will feel the need to inhale again, exhale. Just let that happen and go straight back into your next inhale. Again, a nice, comfortable inhale, don't force it in. Starting again with your long, slow, soft exhale. Again, not forcing anything out, just go to a comfortable exhale and let it flow into the next inhale. Slowly on the exhale, soft. You want it to be nearly imperceptible. As long as you can manage. Gonna do one more round. And whenever you're finished, you can just come back to us. Lovely. How did you find that?
I go to sleep.
Perfect.
It's lovely.
So, you know, that's